Hello and welcome to our podcast on the colon. And of course we're talking about the piece of punctuation rather than that organ that does something inside your body that I'm not exactly sure what it does. We are of course talking about the piece of punctuation. So let's go ahead and get going here. No, not this colon. We mean this colon. This is when you have the two little dots that are on top of each other like this. That is the colon. And so it's not the one with the dot on top and the comma on the bottom. That is called a semicolon, and it has its own set of uses. We mean the full colon, so the two dots on top of each other. That's actually what this looks like, and this is what we're talking about. So here's just some background on the colon itself. When reading and you come across a colon, it has a pause that is similar in length to that of a period. So you can't just blow through the colon that you see and just move on. You should be pausing probably about the same length that you do for a period. So a little bit longer than a comma, a little bit longer than a dash, that kind of stuff. So in terms of usage, a colon is preceded by a complete sentence. That means, in reverse, we need to have a complete sentence, then we can use a colon, then we can add some other material. And we'll talk about what those other pieces of material are. But the big key to correctly use this is that it must be complete sentence, then a colon, then the other stuff. Oftentimes people just throw in colons because they think that, oh, I'm setting up a list, I'll just put a colon in here. No, there are very strict rules for where they go and how they should be used, and we're going to share those with you now. So here is what that looks like using the graphic organizer that we have talked about throughout our class this year. We need to have a complete sentence, and remember that means it has a complete thought, capital letters, punctuation, and a subject and a verb. That's a complete sentence, and that's all wrapped up within our little sentence in a box graphic organizer there. We must have a complete sentence, then a colon, and then whatever you're going to do with it after that colon, whether it's set up a list or another way of introducing a direct quote. But either way, we must have a complete sentence, then a colon, then the other stuff. You cannot put a colon randomly in the middle of a sentence. And so a little humor for us. Yes, common usage number 1. Most people tend to use them either in introducing a list or in the use of emoticons, those silly little things, the faces that you can make with your keyboard. So haha, just kidding, here we go. All right, so colon usage number 1. After the greeting of a business letter, we're going to use a colon after that person's name and or title. So, Dear Mr. President, that's probably a formal letter. Dear Mr. President, colon, and then do your letter. Dear Senator Washington, colon. Dear Colonel Sanders, colon. Now this would go for email also, so if you're writing a more formal email to somebody, maybe asking for a college recommendation or a job application scenario, you're going to go ahead and use a colon after that person's name and or title. This is different from what we call a friendly letter. If you're just writing to Dear Aunt Sue because you want to thank her for the $5 for your birthday, then it's just Dear Aunt Sue, comma, because it's a friendly letter. But if it's something more formal, something more businesslike, then you do Dear Mr. Smith, colon. So that's our first usage of the colon in a business letter. Common usage number 2 is that the colon tends to announce something. And so, for example, at the bottom there, if you have a complete sentence, then you may follow that with a colon. Then you may follow that with another independent clause that explains the point before in that previous sentence. So if you don't want to have 2 complete sentences, which independent clauses are, and for some reason you want to stick them together and have that second clause further explain the first one, then you can use a colon. For example, this much is clear, Watson, colon, it was the baying of an enormous hound. So that second part, it was the baying of an enormous hound, is further explaining what is clear. And so we actually have 2 independent clauses stuck together. And so we have to be careful because oftentimes that has the potential to create a run-on sentence, which we've talked about in previous podcasts. And so you have to look at the usage of your 2 clauses. In this case, we want the second clause, it was the baying, to further describe this. And so we are able to, because we're just explaining further, we're able to use a colon. And it kind of changes the rhythm of the sentence a little bit, and it avoids the run-on. Tom has only one rule in life. Colon, never eat anything bigger than your head. And so again, the second independent clause further describes that rule. Well, what is the rule in life? Colon, explanation of it. And if you look at it, everything to the left of the colon is a complete sentence. It could stand on its own. You could then make another complete sentence to the right of the colon. Never eat anything bigger than your head. But in this case, we're choosing to use it as the second independent clause, further explaining the first one. Therefore, the colon is acceptable. But again, we have to be careful that we're not creating run-on situations where you say something like, Tom has only one rule in life, and that is never eat anything bigger than your head. When you add those extra words of, and that is, then you have to use the wonder twins. You have to use that comma and a conjunction to combine those. But if you just want to use the second to further explain the first one, you can get away with using a colon. That is okay. Common usage number 3. This is where we introduce a part of a sentence that restates, exemplifies, gives balance, and so kind of a list type thing. This is very similar to the one we just showed, but that the stuff after the colon is not an independent clause. It is just a list. So again, our graphic organizer down there, we would have to have a complete sentence, then a colon, and then the list. For example here, please bring the following, colon, bread, rice, and milk. Everything to the left of that colon could stand on its own as a complete sentence. You could write a sentence that just said, please bring the following, period. That has all 4 elements of the complete sentence. But for some reason, they have chosen to make the complete sentence and then add the list that clarifies after that colon, which is completely legal. Number 2, clearly the student was engaged. Colon, how was he engaged? He had his eyes open and his pencil moving. Okay, so that's a correct usage of the colon again, because we have a complete sentence on the left, colon, and then further explanation. And so again, the big thing we have to have is complete sentence on the left, then the colon, and then anything else we want to add. I find fault with only 3 things in this essay of yours, colon, the beginning, the middle, and the end. So while it's a pretty harsh criticism, it is a correct usage of the colon, because everything that's underlined there could stand on its own as a complete sentence. I find fault with only 3 things in this essay of yours, period. Therefore, if it could stand on its own and meet all the requirements of the complete sentence, then you may follow that with a colon, and you may follow that with a list. Common usage number 4 is to use the colon as another way to introduce direct quotations. It does get kind of annoying to keep reading and to keep writing, and so the author says, comma, quotes, I, blah, blah, blah. Or, the character then said, comma, quotes, blah, blah, blah. Let's find another way. This is the other way. If you have a complete sentence, you can then follow that with a colon, and then you can set up your quoted material. That's a great way to use that colon as long as you have the complete sentence on the left, and then you can follow that with the actual quotes. Just be wary of how you craft that complete sentence on the left. For example, George made a great point, colon. I think you should keep your mouth shut. So rather than say, George made a great point, and he said, comma, quotes, I think you should keep your mouth shut, this student has chosen to say, George made a great point, colon, and then give us the quote. That's a great use of the colon. It's completely legal. And again, please notice that everything that's underlined is a complete sentence first, then your colon, and then your quote. The Allies brought many tanks with them, quote, colon, quote, they brought over 10,000 tanks into France during D-Day. Again, everything that's underlined is a complete sentence, then the colon, and then they've chosen to use the quote. They could have written it any way they wanted to, but it's nice to see a break from the Allies brought many tanks with them, and the textbook says, comma, quotes, they brought over. It's a nice way of introducing a quote without having to say, the textbook says, the author says, the character says, comma, quotes. Use a colon. but please make sure you have a complete sentence to the left of that colon. That is the key. The common error with the colon, and this is what I'd said before, is that people just like randomly throw in a colon whenever they think they should or they want to or they want to pause or something. The common error is that people will oftentimes separate the verb, that action, from what is called its direct object, meaning the thing receiving the action. So for example, you cannot say, please bring, milk, eggs, and butter, because you have separated the verb, bring, from what you're supposed to bring, or the direct object, the milk, eggs, and butter. And again, it breaks that cardinal rule that we've talked about, that you must have a complete sentence to the left of the colon. And so if you look at that structure, you say, is please bring a complete sentence? And the answer is no. Even if you capitalize the P, even if you put a period at the end of it, even if you have a subject, which is understood you, and you have the verb, which is bring, what is missing is a complete thought. Please bring what? It? Something? A list? Like we don't have the complete thought. Therefore, please bring is not a complete sentence. Therefore, you can't have a colon right there in your sentence. But you can do it this way. Please bring the following, milk, eggs, and butter. And the reason is that please bring the following could be a complete sentence. We could put that on its own with a cap and a period. It does have a subject and a verb, and it does express a complete thought. Please bring the following, period. Therefore, we could add the colon, and then we can follow that with the list. So please be very careful. That's the biggest error we see in terms of colon usage. People just throw in the colon whenever they think a list is coming and they can throw it in there. You can only use that colon if to the left of the colon is a complete sentence. Check that first, then use your colon, then get nutty with the list. So on our last slide here, go ahead and pause this and see if you can place the colon in the correct location. All of these do require a colon, and they are actually created correctly. So if you place the colon in the right place, you've done it correctly. So go ahead and pause the podcast now and see if you can correctly place where the colon should go on these. And so here you can check your work. You can see that the first one is take this lesson to heart, nobody can make you feel inferior. Number 2, one word probably sums up the responsibility of any governor, to be prepared. I have lived in 3 places, Florida, Maine, Vermont. The little boy in E.T. did say something neat, How do you explain school to a higher intelligence? So if you're checking your work, make sure you've put the colons there. And again, double check. Everything to the left of a colon could stand alone as a complete sentence. Therefore, when you add the colon to either add further explanation, add a list, or add quoted material, you are legal in doing so and you have correctly used the colon. I think that's about it. So have a good one and we'll see you soon. Thanks.